Welcome, I'm Darren, and I'll be your guide today as I look at the Pacific Triple Folder cards from 1992 through 1995. Pacific itself was built out of a company that had been around for quite a few years. All the way through the 80s, they'd been making cards, and in 1991, they finally made their first launch into a professional card set, that being Pacific Plus, a football card set. And they wanted to have kind of a higher end card, but for 1991, they just weren't. They unfortunately hit the market right when the market was starting to really get dynamic, and so all the dynamism that they had for their card set was kind of lost. In 1992, their card set looked a little bit better, but it still wasn't dynamic. It kind of fell into the sea of 1992 cards. There was nothing really standing out about them, so they were going to have to play around some more in order to make something that really was distinctive. But that didn't mean that they were just resting on their laurels and writing on the set. While in 1993 they would release their Prism set, in 1992 they did something that was very, very unique. Now, in the 1980s, there had been basically card collecting in the 1980s was primarily out of grocery stores and out of big stores. And there were only a couple of brands, and so for kids who would go into the toy section, the gum section, they'd have the cards there. They would look through, and you only had like 5 or 6 different packs to choose from. And so companies like Topps and Don Russ and Fleer, they would start to make little secondary sets or maybe complete sets that you could buy in little box form, just kind of some extra stuff for kids to collect. And some of these, especially with Don Russ, were oversized. They were really big cards. And so you'll be collecting the 600 card set for the main set, but then you'd also have this little 60 card set, and you may have a pack of 5 cards. You open it up and just get 5 cards out of these 60, and it was a fun little thing to collect on the side. But this was kind of filling in the gaps of just not there just not being very much product out there, even though kids were starting to collect a lot more. But by the end of the decade, there were so many brands that just didn't make any more sense. So Topps, Don Russ, Fleer, they basically abandoned selling secondary sets, interesting little side sets. And so in 1992, Pacific decided to pick up that mantle, and including with an oversized card, they decided to make a special set. These were basically 1 card per pack. They were actually 2 cards per pack, but they were essentially the equivalent of 1 card per pack. They were oversized cards, and they were really kind of cool. They were intended to just kind of sit there on the counter for you to collect kind of on the side. It was a very small set, and the triple folder cards were double size of a regular card. So it was kind of like if you took 2 cards, put them next to each other. It's a horizontal oriented card. It is a very, very Pacific design, very minimalist. It's basically the player name on the front. It's the Pacific logo. That's just about it. And then the shot of the player has a simple white border around the outside. And on the card back, it has a very Pacific insert-like card back. It's a little tough to read. It's kind of garish, but it's also kind of cool. It's got a very dynamic quality to it, which is kind of neat. Nice little write-up, and then some information about the player's season. But the big thing about triple folders is that you open up the doors on the front and you see inside. Right in the middle, there's a shot of the player. And then on the right side, you have a portrait of the player. And on the left side, you have an action shot of the player. And that is the model of the cards. There are only 28 of these. There's 1 player per team. So it's basically 1 league worth of stars of teams. And then in each pack, they also had an insert for the regular card set. And this is where it really gets kind of interesting, because in the card set, it was kind of difficult to get all of these inserts. Well, here they came 1 per pack, so they were actually easier to get in these more rare card packs. So that was this really interesting idea. It was just a novelty set off on the side. It was a fun little thing to do, and it had just enough traction they could justify doing it again in 1993. Now in 93, they again had insert cards inside of it, but the main cards of this set was basically identical. There was really no difference, except on the outside they have a silver border instead of a white border. Otherwise, the card front looks almost identical. When you open it up, you still have the action shot in the middle. You have a small action shot on the left side. You have a portrait shot on the right side. And on the card back here, they got more into writing. You can see they're using the marble texture of the Pacific design for 1993. So that looks a little bit more grown up. I mean, overall, the whole card set looks a little bit more grown up. But they also didn't do just 1 card for each team. So here you could have more than 1 player from a particular team showing up on one of these cards. But like I said, they did do some inserts, and the main insert that they did was Rookies and Stars. This is the first time that anybody was using Rookies and Stars. Pacific would use it for a couple of years, and then it would get picked up by Leaf, and they'd be using it later on. But these Pacific triple folders cards, the insert cards, are really difficult to know where they come from, because you can look forever trying to figure out which Pacific set it is, and if you don't know triple folders even exist, you're never going to look here. This is before Pacific started putting the actual set on the card number on the back. They started doing that in 1997, and it was a big relief. Because here, I mean, they have nothing on it. These Rookies and Stars cards from 1993 are especially bad. The card front is a full bleed image of the player. It's the logo, it's the name, the position. That is it. That is absolutely it. This looks like a card back. Now, if you turn it over, you can see that the back of the card looks even more like a card back. But that's the thing. There is nothing that tells you anything about this set, about what the set comes from. It is a really confusing card. So if you see this card, understand this is where this is from. But they also did another insert, which is in Pacific in 1992. They did an insert set which had prisms. And so for 1993, they did a full-blown prism set. But also in the regular 93 Pacific set, they did an insert set again with prisms. They did two specifically. They did one with more of a diamond prism, and then the other one was a bunch of circles. Well, they also did a gold version of the diamond prisms, but not in the regular Pacific set. They instead did that in the triple folders. So in the triple folders, you get the gold version of those cards. So that's something that is, you run into it every once in a while and you try to figure out where in the world did they come from. Well, they came from these triple folders cards. In 1994, they continued again, but here they made some changes. They went back to the white border. So that was, I don't think the 94 images look as good, but one big distinction about these cards is that here in 94, they have just the player's name on the front, or his first name on the front. On the card back, they have a really interesting pattern, and they have kind of a ghost image of the player in the middle, which is kind of a unique thing for them to do. The write-up about the player is very small, but this is all about this big image on the back, which is kind of fun. But the big thing is when you open up the card, right in the middle, you have the player's last name over the big action shot in the middle. And then over on the left side, you have the action shot again, and on the right side, you have a portrait. But you'll notice that on either side, they have that same pattern that you saw on the card back. So the action shot is kind of like just a miniature version of what had been on the card back. But they also have, for their inserts, their Rookies and Stars insert in this set has that exact same pattern, and it looks exactly like the action shot. Now, do note, with John Elway, it is actually the same. So it's kind of like the panel on the left is a preview of the insert card for John Elway. That's a rare thing. In most cases, the action shot on the left panel is different from the Rookies and Stars card. But in this case, it is the same. But still, the Rookies and Stars card uses that same background. So it's like a theme that they use. And it looks pretty good on the Rookies and Stars card insert set. On the back of those cards, they have almost no write-up, which is, it's fine. You're not really looking at the write-ups. But again, they don't say anything about what this card set is. So just understand that that is what this card set is. But that was all that they did for 1994. So for 93, they actually had two insert sets. 94, they didn't bother doing the two insert sets. They just had one insert set dedicated to triple folders. For 1995, the gimmick was starting to wear off. Pacific was expanding out what they were making, and so triple folders was kind of a casualty, because when you're making professional sets, these little gimmick sets, these novelty sets, can kind of fall to the wayside. And the oversized card makes it a really fun novelty for a while, and then that dies off. So in 95, they decided to shrink the cards down so they were normal size. And here the cards, again, they're not one per team. They have, it's really cool to see how these cards look, because without the border, since they shrank it down, they got rid of the border, you had a full bleed, it made the images stand out more. I mean, granted, they had to work a little bit harder at the images, but the images have a certain richness. And on the card back, they have a very Pacific, 1995 Pacific-like card back with this lawn behind the player and a little bit of write-up. It works pretty well. When you open up these cards, again, they're laid out the same way, but they don't have the border, which means that each one of the images, these are deeply saturated images. They're very heavy. They look really good. So you have the big image in the middle, you have the action shot on the left, you have the portrait shot on the right. It works the same way. But in 95, they also did another one of these where it was a set of cards for the teams, literally for the teams, not all the teams, but for most of the teams. Here, these triple folders, again, the same size, they're regular card size, but these are vertically oriented. And so you have one player on the front, and then on the card back, you have another player. But when you open this card up, you have a really huge shot of the star player for the team. And you have, in this case, which is kind of unique, they have gold foil for the player's name up on the top, and then down at the bottom you have a big medallion with the team on it. So these cards these are really cool. I actually really like these. I wish that they'd done this more, but for 95 at least they did get around to doing this. But they also had a lot of inserts for 95, starting with Big Game. Now, Big Game is another one that'll really throw you off, because in 95 they were doing some inserts kind of like this. Again, there's nothing to tell you what this insert set is or where it comes from, but there's a lot of gold foil on it. But what really is significant about this gold foil is that it's actually a rainbow. It's kind of a modeled rainbow holofoil. So this is something you would see in Summit the next year, 1996. But here in 95, this was a really bold thing that they had on this card. There's a lot going on this card, because there's the gold foils all around. They have all sorts of things going on, and then when you get the light right and the holofoil really takes off, it's a mess of a card. It's not a great card design, but it is really fun to see what they did. But that's where these Big Game cards come from. It come from triple folders. The card back is really lousy, and I like it a lot because the card back has all the things that you want to be really interesting. And so I like looking at it, I just don't like exploring it. Then they have Careers, and Careers this is a solid gold holofoil card. Now this is a straight holofoil. It doesn't have all the texturing to it. So the way that the light affects it is just in one way. This card is all about the detailing on the card back, or the etching within. So you have basically like a digital horizon, and they have a bunch of numbers all over the place, and the word career down the side. That's basically it. The card is very bold. It's overly bold. It's kind of cool in a way. But again, it doesn't say very much. The card back, however, I really like the card back. It's a horizontal orientation to the card back, and they have a really good write-up on the back about the player, or some things about the player's career. So I do like how all that worked. Then they have a slightly more ambitious card in terms of crystalline, and this is where Pacific was starting to explore acetate, or basically plastic cards. Here it is team color down at the bottom with some gold foil printed on it, and then you have a player up above with some clear plastic around it. You flip it over, and on the back it has kind of a write-up and team helmet and some stuff kind of in the bottom area, and then up in the shadow of the player you have the player name and the diagnostics about the player. It's kind of a nice card. It's not all that dynamic, but it really does look kind of nice, especially with the gold foil. But the big insert for this card set was their Rookies and Stars. And here the Rookies and Stars actually has quite a bit of a design to it. It has some modeled textured gold foil down at the bottom, and then it has kind of almost a Tetris-like effect up above. It's kind of an interesting idea. It's not really all that effective, but I do like how the player image kind of fits with it. And the dynamic quality of the gold foil, it has just the right contrast to it. I think it's well balanced. On the card back, it uses kind of the same effect without any foil. And here, I'm not as big of a fan of it. It is kind of hard to read the text, but this is one of those inserts that definitely is not intended to be read, because this is one of those where it's all about the parallels. This is Pacific, they're going to do parallels, and here they definitely do. So they have 3 different parallels. The main card, of course, has a gold foil. Well, they also have one with a blue foil, and that is a very common parallel. But then they have 2 other more challenging parallels to get. One of them being with silver, and then the other one is with raspberry. And the raspberry is really rich color. So you get those 3 different parallels that you get to pursue, and that makes it really does make it a lot of fun. And that is the end of talking about triple folders. It's quite a card set. The way that the history that it had over the years was really it was a lot of fun. It was very creative, and it was such a bizarre little thing that, like in my case, I don't even remember ever seeing these packs for sale. I know they were, but I don't remember seeing them for sale. They were very unusual to encounter. So that's basically what I want to say about this. I'm going to do another video coming up on gridiron and on lithocells, because those, I would almost put those in with this video, but because they do kind of have a relationship, and yet gridiron and lithocell is kind of like the next step. It's kind of where they were trying to get serious sets. These were intended to be novelties. They were always treated as novelties. They were small sets. And it was a fun thing they were exploring, but it was kind of setting them up for the mid-90s. And so it's fun to explore this, but it's also a really good subject to look at and go, so that's where these cards come from, because that really is the case. With these cards, that is the big thing of, okay, so that's where it came from. So I hope that you've been able to follow along. This is probably a video that's going to, if not up to this point, probably in the future, help you out with running into one or two cards where you just look and go, what in the world? Well, now you probably know. So thank you very much for watching. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, definitely do so. Check out other videos that I've done. And thank you for watching.